Hello, everyone. I'm Arnaud Crozet, Vice President Consulting at FIM, and welcome for this panel dedicated to the digital identity for domestic schemes. Just before to start, a few details. At the end, you will have the time for a Q&A session, and you can see on your screen that there is a Q&A logo, so please use it for the Q&A session. The conversation is deactivated, so go to the Q&A to ask all the different questions that you may have to our panelists. As an introduction, this event, this webinar, is also following the domestic event that we had already together in March this year. And we already discussed about different type of topics, and we decided, and it has been requested also by many of you, to continue to have this type of interaction between us. And so that topic on digital identity is one of the topics that several persons asked to go a bit more in details. We will try to have other discussion like that during the year, and the next event will be in September 2024. So we will have another event, so you can already book the fact that in September we will meet all together again. And next year we will have different webinars on different topics to continue to exchange together on very interesting topics for domestic schemes. Maybe to start and to introduce the subject. So first of all, you already know FIM, and I'm in charge of the consulting, and I'm used to present FIM as a consulting company with a real specificity regarding testing and certification. It means that in terms of consulting, we have a real understanding and deep understanding on how the market is evolving, and we are able to help you up to the testing and certification. So to have the global picture, to define exactly what could be a position, strategy, how we can position yourself on the market compared to other actors. But of course, as you know, to go up to the testing and certification. And we have this worldwide approach, working with the different actors of the payment chain internationally. So this provides us a 360 vision on how the ecosystem is growing. So the reason today to discuss on this interesting topic on digital identity. So to go and to introduce this subject, so we see that digital identity is growing everywhere. It's a fact, it is there, and it's growing time after time for all countries. We already see different initiatives in different zones with different type of solutions, and we will go more in detail later on that. But you have different approach on digital identity on different countries with different way to do it and to manage it with different type of business model. But this is a fact. Digital identity will be part of our day-to-day life in the coming months. Several ways to use it with several type of application across the different sectors. So the digital identity can be used really in different parts of the customer journey. And especially, it can also help on the payment, of course, and to reinforce the security and the customer authentication. So many types of use cases could be used for digital identity. This is a very interesting topic, and it's also why different other actors are also working on it. So for instance, and this is public information, but Apple and Google, they are also working a lot on digital identity to try to have digital identity in their own ecosystem. MasterCard is also working, so this is public also. They already try, they already test several things, and they are trying to adjust their position on eID. Another fact is that I will just focus on the European landscape quickly, because European landscape is totally convinced on digital identity, and they are now working and on legal framework. They have done legal framework to impose digital identity in Europe with a target of 80% of the European population by 2030 to have access to a digital identity for the whole Europe, in all countries in Europe. So just to say that in Europe, it is a fact that the European digital identity will be there. So a possibility to use it also for other type of services. During the different work and studies that we have done, we have identified many ways to use digital identity for payment. And this is, I would say, a particularity. You can see the digital identity as a common way for digitalize ID card, for instance, or stuff like that. But we took it in the other angle on how we can rely or use the digital identity for payment itself. So we try to find different ways to use it and where it can improve and help. For instance, it can help on improving the user experience in the customer journey. It can help also for security and fraud management, to seamless transactions. If you can have identity information directly in the transactions or before the transaction, you can have a more seamless approach. And also digital identity can help for many other purposes that could be very interesting for banks, merchants, and schemes. For KYC, for account to account, for loyalty, for trust, for buy now, pay later, for different customer services, and especially to have a way to check the customer identity in the whole customer journey, from the checking up to the delivery of the goods, and so on. So different type of way to use digital identity in the customer journey and in the payment sector by default. And depending on your market, depending on your need, depending on your current situation, of course, all these different use cases can be adapted and have to be adapted depending on your current situation, on your specific countries and regulation. But this is a fact. The digital identity will become increasingly important in payment more and more, to identify new payment method, to secure, to trust, to facilitate the payment and to improve the overall customer experience. And it's why domestic schemes have a strong opportunity with the digital identity market. First, you can influence the market. You can go quicker on the market to provide this type of approach and solution. You can also have a turnkey service for banks and merchants to help to improve the customer experience, to reduce fraud, to provide a new way to have a strong customer authentication, interacting with also with customers, and at the end to provide new added value and added value to the market, to your customer at the end. So I will stop there just to say that this is part of our consulting activity and to help you on that approach. And in that case, we have an example of methodology that we already use is to go to workshop with your product team to fully understand exactly where you are, what you are providing, how you can improve your offer and solutions, to have also a market size based on the regulations, the current local actors, and so on, to help you to analyze the potential revenue based on that, because at the end there is a business model also to find with a digital identity. So it could be a fee, it could be a per transaction, it could be different type of model, it could be also using a tokenization where you can add additional values. And based on your current situation, we provide recommendation and advice with action plans on what you can do compared to your market, compared to where you are, what is your current situation, current services, and how you can improve and position yourself on that subject. I will stop there. This was just an introduction. And of course, the most important now is to have the discussion with our guest. So for that, today we have honor to have with us some very good experts to share their perspective and experience on this subject. So we will discuss that on the benefit of the ecosystem, the merchants, and the advantage with innovation and development and new functionality. So for that, thank you to welcome Yuka. So Yuka, Global VP Head of Digital Solution at J&D. Thank you, Yuka. Mei-Ling, Chief Information Officer at Paynet. Hello, Mei-Ling. and Rick, Head of Product and Scheme from Australian Payment Plus, and it's very late for you from Australia. So thank you to all. Thank you to be there with us. I would like to have a quick introduction, quick roundtable from each of you to introduce yourself and your company in few words. So maybe Yuka, could we start with you?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, happy to be here. And yeah, maybe very quickly. So Jukka Yliuntinen, I always say that fits perfectly for the industry because it's kind of an encrypted word, so people difficult to understand. I'm coming from Finland, but I'm representing Giesecke Devrient. G&D is a global service provider, technology provider for multiple sectors, including payment, digital securities, as well as then the governmental solutions. We operate globally. It's a German-based asset, but we are present in 52 countries. And what we do is very much always related to security. That's why we call it now a security tech company. My role in the company is that I'm looking our digital financial portfolio. So that means that anything that we can provide for the financial institutions on a digital channel service solution software is in my portfolio. And here, of course, the identity is also very relevant. We have other business sectors where actually we just do identities, for example, e-passport, electronic identities, border control systems, and so forth. But as we see, the world is converging, and as Arno already said, so there is a lot of touch points where payment and digital identity come together. So, yeah, I'll leave it here and back to you, Arno.
Thank you, Yuka. Thank you. So, well expert on digital identity and globally then. Mei-Ling, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Mei-Ling Mudin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of PayNet. I have two roles in the company. As a CISO, I'm responsible for cybersecurity strategy and cyber risk management, data protection, and also advising the business on security. My other role, which we're going to talk about later, which I'm very excited to share with the attendees today, is the development of the digital identity for the financial services in Malaysia. Right? PayNet, Payments Network Malaysia Sdn Bhd, is the domestic payments system and a shared central infrastructure for the financial industry. What do? We do anything related to payments in the country, be it retail payments, QR payments. We also operate the national debit scheme. We also run the shared ATM infrastructure for the country. We also manage the interbank gyro, the batch processing, and of course, interbank transfer. There's also another business. We also do a check clearing, right? That for the banks as well. We are owned by the central bank, majority owned by the central bank, and 11 other banks in Malaysia. And just to give a bit of perspective, in terms of transaction, year to date, we process about 4.5 trillion of transaction volume for the country. So that's about slightly below $1 trillion. So essentially, we are at the very heart of payments in Malaysia, right? So whenever money moves in Malaysia, highly likely PayNet is behind it. So very excited to share our journey with everyone today.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. Thank you. Interesting. Rick, can you please introduce yourself and your company?
Yeah, good evening from Australia and good morning and good middle of the day or overnight to wherever everyone else is on the call. But hi, I'm Rick Iverson. I'm what we call Head of Product and Scheme for Connect ID. Product being pretty standard product development. And the scheme, which is normally the part that needs explaining to most people, is going to be pretty obvious to most people on this call. So Connect ID is owned by Australian Payments Plus. And so for those unfamiliar with Australian Payments Plus, it is the new sort of conglomerate entity which brings together Australia's 3 existing domestic payment schemes. So that is FPOS for card rails, the new payments platform for real-time account-to-account payments, and BPay, which is sort of our domestic bill payments scheme. So they are 3 well-established schemes in Australia already, and Australian Payments Plus is now sort of the merged entity that controls all 3. We have just launched a new 4th scheme called Connect ID, which is an identity verification scheme. So it is a new secure way for customers to prove their identity online. And it does operate exactly like a payment scheme. We have what we call identity providers, but effectively issuers on one side of the market. And we have what we call our relying parties, which is effectively merchants on the other side of the market. So structurally, it's really similar to a scheme. And we are the scheme operator. We're not an identity provider ourselves. We don't have customer details. We don't verify customers' information. I sort of think about it a bit like, Visa. Most people have got a Visa card in their wallet, but they don't actually have a direct relationship with Visa. They have a relationship with their bank. And that's the way that we're set up. We want everyone to know about Connect ID and use Connect ID, but they'll access it via their bank and use their bank to prove who they are online.
Excellent. Thank you. Yuka, with your global perspective, can you present us or discuss about the eID market trend?
Okay, yes. Just also my background has been working with the identity somehow the last 25 years. There is first of all, a distinction that when you go for the electronic identity, often people look also that, okay, it's kind of that you just digitized your identity, but it's not actually the same as real electronic identity. So when looking globally, I mean, the needs have been probably a bit different, and the pace of adopting electronic identity is also very different. Well, myself, I come from Nordics, where we have a very established electronic identity. So, I mean, the last 10 years, I think most of the countries here, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they have established a scheme for electronic identity, where, by the way, the banks have been the most active player. That means that whatever I do on a digital world, on an internet, I can use my digital identity. And it's also made convenient, which is, by the way, a very important factor. But of course, looking the markets in general, so I mean it's very fragmented. So there is still a lot of methods where we identify ourselves somehow, which is based, for example, on passwords, pins, and things like this. And same time, you need the stronger authentication, because more and more we act in the digital world. Convenience is the factor, but also, let's say, security in the large perspective is an important item as well. Think about, for example, in the payment world, the last few years, especially the COVID, when the e-commerce started to boom really big time. Of course, it's been there already. Well, fraud actually has increased similarly. So there needs to be a way how you identify not only who is able, like a consumer accessing the services, but you would need to also actually identify the counterpart, because that's also important. So there are a lot of activities, what we see globally. I mean, we have representatives here from Malaysia, Australia, but if I look LATAM, a lot of activities, North America for sure, India, they have established, China, Singapore, very prevalent. So, at same time, I mean, if you look this whole ecosystem of electronic identity, they are still very local, the initiative. And then, of course, one of the challenges probably going forward is also kind of how do we do this kind of a global or cross-border reliable electronic identity. But you need to start somewhere, and I honestly believe that doing something locally, domestically, is a good way to start.
And in that case, can you elaborate on what is the role of a domestic car scheme in the eID market?
Well, that is, of course, the topic for today. So, like you already presented in the beginning, so the major schemes, MasterCard has been also very active. We know, for example, also that in the Europe, where there is this eIDs regulation, basically mandating that there needs to be the electronic identity provided by each member countries, as well as the e-identity wallet. Visa is also very active. There are these major pilots ongoing at the moment, and again, payment and the identity comes very much together. And if you think about the concept of electronic identity, well, Rick also referred to this one, that there is a network, and then whatever you run in that network, well, payment is one that the schemes already have. Well, you could run also other kind of credentials or attributes, and that's definitely what the major schemes look. But we already see that, I mean, this is happening on the domestic level. Interac, for example, from Canada is a good example. They are a payment scheme. They do very much what Meling was already mentioning, but now they decided that maybe it makes sense that actually we put the electronic identity to that entity so that they can run the identity there.
Thank you. So, Meling, in that case, could you tell us about the Malaysian market also on your side?
Sure. So we don't have an electronic eID scheme yet. However, just recently, the government has announced the implementation of a national digital identity. So that will be piloted sometime Q1 or Q2 next year. So essentially what that means is that the government is, I would say, is kind of like digitalizing the physical identity card that every Malaysian have. So in Malaysia, you are given an identity card that contains certain attributes, your name, your identity card number, your address, and so on and so forth, including your fingerprint, right? That you carry with you from your birth all the way to your death, right? And for the past many years, a lot of transactions over the counter, for example, when it's to verify somebody, you present your identity card, and they will read your thumbprint to verify who you are. So a lot of transactions has been based around this physical identity card, including digital transactions for onboarding, right? So, example, when you go onboarding, as part of the KYC process, the banks will, you have to do a document proofing, liveness test, and that's where then the banks will determine whether you are who you claim to be. So that's the situation now. However, the banks, until recently, realized that there is a need for digital ID, right? While the government has been talking about implementing digital identity for the past many years, it's taken them a long time to really start doing that. But the banks really need, I would say the banks, the e-wallets and the digital banks are impatient because there is a real urgency for digital ID for the purpose of customer identification and verification.
Why was there this type of urgency? Why it was urgent for banks to have it?
Yeah, so one of the big issue, okay, there's a few issues, a few challenges, right? One of the biggest challenge in Malaysia right now, issues that's impacting most Malaysians are scams and fraud, right? When we look at, so Malaysia is very unique in a way that we are very risk averse, right? So while the total losses due to scams and fraud if you compare it against our GDP, or even the revenues, the transactions that the banks combined make, it's a drop in the ocean. However, the impact is very, very significant to the citizen, especially to the victims, right? So the government realized that there is need to curb, to better detect, prevent, and mitigate fraud and scam. So that's one challenge. Secondly, the banks, when it comes to digital onboarding, the current process is very, very clunky and it gives a lot of friction to the customer. You have to do so many things just to get your identity verified, and it's not always foolproof. Scammers will fake or tamper with the identity card. They put their face on the identity card, and those are very, very difficult to detect, and it's an occurring problem. So the banks really need a method to accurately verify the identity of their customers. And last but not least, the eKYC guidelines by the central bank right now is very, very onerous, right? There's a requirement to even perform eyeballing on the customers that has been onboarded. And that increased costs, operational costs, that delays onboarding and cause customers to drop off. Yeah.
And in that case, what development have occurred? Is it how do you reply to that urgency?
Yeah. So in my introduction earlier, PANET is at the center, is at the heart of payments in Malaysia. We are trusted by the banks. We are trusted by the central bank as well, right? To facilitate and mediate payments. So we are in a position to help the industry to be better at identification, to be better at detecting and mitigating scams and fraud. So in a way, we need to do something together with the industry and the central bank. So the banks, the central bank has mandated PANET. Our shareholders also have mandated us to help them solve the problem of identity verification and authentication. So we are embarking on an initiative where we are providing a set of services around identity verification and authentication for the financial industry. So as of now, we don't have a digital identity yet. We are still in the design phase, but in the past few months, we have spoke to our member banks, the digital banks and the e-wallets to get more insights on their issues and challenges, and prioritizing the use cases for identity verification and authentication. So so that's
Good, thank you, Menin. Rick, what is also on your side? What is the current status of digital identity in Australia, and how did this initiative start?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Arno. So Australia is a slightly different market. We don't have a national identity card, and governments have been kicked out of office. They've lost elections over the concept of bringing one in. So Australians have a very large distrust of their government, and sort of any kind of attempt to sort of centralise an identity scheme has really been resisted against. We have had we have had attempts at digital identity schemes in Australia in the last few years. We had a private sector one that got off the ground and just didn't quite get the take up that they would have liked. And so you sort of end up in the death spiral of adoption, where there's, there are no merchants because you don't have enough customers. There's no reason for customers to sign up because they don't have anywhere to use it. And it just becomes this sort of horrible spiral. The government as well have launched, they have launched a national digital identity provider. So MyGov ID is available to citizens, and a lot of people have downloaded it. but it is a purely government service. And so you use that to access certain government systems, and even then, not very many, but you can use it to get into the tax office. It's actually a worse experience than if you use a password manager and you just use your password manager to log into the tax office. It's actually much better than their digital identity solution. So it's got its challenges. But in both cases, what we've seen is you can do the tech, but adoption is the hard part, and building the breadth of use cases and the breadth of places to use it. So neither of those have got huge amounts of adoption. Obviously, then through COVID times, more and more business moved online, and people just got used to doing everything digitally. And so we sort of think that some of the earlier initiatives were maybe just a little bit too early. The other thing that has sort of crystallized interest in digital identity is some pretty high-profile data breaches that have happened in Australia in the last 12 months. So our largest private healthcare provider, one of our largest telcos, and a large financial services institution all had pretty substantial data breaches. And so just about everyone in Australia has had their data compromised in one form or another in the last 12 months. And so people are a lot more focused on their own privacy and the value of their data, probably more so than they would have been a few years back. So we think it's now the right time to launch a digital identity initiative. We've done our research suggests that people are open to it. They recognise the value of their data and the value of things that go to preserving the security of their data and their privacy. So we think it's the right time to do it, and that the banking industry is the right place to kick that off from.
But why the banking industry in that case explore digital identity instead of the government? Because usually we say that digital identity is more to be managed by an official entity, a state entity, let's say. So why banking industry started to work on it?
Yeah, so sort of again, it's a cultural thing in Australia, and we see the same thing in the UK and New Zealand and America to some degree, where there just isn't that trust in the government, and there isn't always that centralisation in terms of government structure. Australia itself has 6 different states that do more work than the sort of federal government typically, have more direct interaction with citizens. So again, it's sort of already quite fragmented at the government level. On the other hand, banks they've got quite good relationships with their customers. Again, Australia's a funny place. Everyone hates their bank, but they trust their bank. They don't trust their bank to do the right thing by them, but they do trust their bank to keep their money safe and keep their money safe and keep their data safe. The other thing is banks have really high interaction with their customers. Most people we've got a really high take up of digital banking and particularly with mobile banking apps. So people are logging into their bank, 4, 5, 6 times a week to, check a balance or make a payment or something like that. So it's an interaction that they're already familiar with. And the beauty of it is a bank has already done the KYC of that customer. So they've already done the identity proofing to the AML CTF or KYC standards. And so that's a step that doesn't need to be undertaken again. Whereas if you are a fresh identity provider who wants to purely do that, then the customer experience becomes you have to download the app, you have to do the equivalent of a KYC check or a selfie and a passport and a driver's license, and it's a level of friction that stops people from using the service. Whereas if you use your bank, that's already been done, and there's actually no need to make the first time usage any harder than subsequent uses. And we've seen the examples, as Jukka said, that the Nordic schemes are a really great sort of role model for how it can be a success, and similarly with the guys in Canada.
Yeah, so we see that there is a real interest to have something managed or started from banks or bank initiative, let's say. But question, could it create something like a political issue or something like that between a bank initiative on one side, government actions on the other side?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the nature of the politics of that country. In Australia, the the government is actually really supportive of what we're doing. They have an accreditation process for digital identity systems, and we were the first exchange to be accredited under the government service, so under the government framework. So we work really closely with government, and they see the value of having private sector digital identity solutions. First and foremost, they don't want, as a government agency, even if you're the issuer of an identity, using our MyGov ID, they don't want to deal with 10,000 merchants. They have no way of interacting with them, onboarding them, vetting them at that kind of scale. They don't know how to do a charging framework. There's just a lot of things that they're just not experienced in. And so they're really happy for there to be a private sector network that manages all of that for them. And when they're ready to put their identity app into the private sector, an exchange is sort of the logical place to start.
Okay,
and they
so
also recognize that
it's not a competition in that case. It's really a collaboration, and the government, if I understand well, somehow they are happy that there is this type of private initiative, and at the end, everyone will benefit of a growing market on digital identity, if I understand well.
Yeah, exactly right. The two things are sort of running in parallel, and the government is really supportive of what we're doing. And ultimately, they're actually really keen to see customer choice and give customers the ability to choose their bank, choose their government, choose whoever they feel most comfortable with.
Excellent. So, Yuka, we saw with Melin and Rick that there is a lot of actions done on the country level by domestic schemes and banks initiative domestic schemes. Could you explain from your point of view, could you explain the main advantages for domestic schemes to start to work on digital identity?
Yes, I think that Rick already addressed this as well, Melin. I mean, you need to have, the frequency. So people need to have the habit that they know what they are doing when they use, for example, the digital identity. If it's for governmental identity for governmental services, how often do you use that? I don't know, once a year. I mean, you almost kind of forget how you should do this. So you need to have this frequency, and the frequency typically on all examples where we have seen that it's really taking off is coming from the payment and banking. Easiest use case is, of course, that whenever we log into our mobile or web banking, we use digital identity. And of course, then domestic schemes are very much in this space. So they are typically, of course, even organized so that there are banks, the retail banks, maybe the central banks who are the owners. So there is a kind of an immediate touch point. What I see also strategically myself, I mean, important here is that, domestic schemes are also competing. They are in the competition between the international schemes. And this is definitely something where the domestic schemes also can actually excel, have something where they differ from the international schemes. But from my point of view, really, this is kind of which sets the foundation for the domestic schemes. So there is a really use cases that they are very close to, and this is strategically important for them. Maybe just on the use cases still is that I'm also working in the board of Mobiforum, which is a kind of a financial institute or organization for financial institution, especially of course in the digital space. And we've been working on the electronic identity and the expert group. We have published papers, and we also interviewed actually the banks, the retail banks. How do they see what are the use cases? Well, KYC, that's one. And for example, in Europe, where the identity is kind of getting merged and that this digital identity wallet coming, I mean, what the banks would use, they have already some sort of a KYC, pretty strong one typically. But if you would like to actually onboard a customer of another bank, you could use actually the KYC done by the other bank. So if you have a verified credentials, which has an attribute, yes, we actually guarantee that this customer is already securely onboarded. Well, that's a cost saving for you, because to do that yourself, there is a cost. And of course, if you buy the service, for example, with the cheaper price, there is already a business. Of course, age verification in many of the use cases is very important, but there are plenty of these. But again, I would emphasize always, look that there is the frequency, that people know there is a kind of a behavior thing. And the second one, it needs to be easy to use. And maybe coming to the Rick's point of government and the private sector working, I don't think honestly, the governments are the best, let's say, user experience expert, that they can provide actually the user interfaces, apps or so, which provides same kind of a level of convenience, like for example big techs, or today even the banks do in their banking app.
Good. So we can see that there are many type of use cases and different way to use it and to rely on data, if I understand well. Melin, how PayNet is, how do you plan to manage digital identity on PayNet?
So Yuka and Rick already explained very well what are the data that we can leverage in order to perform identity verification. And one of the ways that that we are thinking about is leveraging the KYC or eKYC data about a customer. So essentially, if a customer has been eKYC'd or KYC'd by a bank, then we can use this as one of the trusted source to perform verification. That way, when they get onboarded with another bank to procure a different set of services, right? What we, as the digital identity intermediary, can then say, hey, this customer has an account with this bank. He has gone through KYC, therefore, good to go, right? So that model leverages data from the banks. The second model would be leveraging data that PayNet has. So as I said earlier, most of the retail transactions flows through PayNet, right? And what we can do is provide supplementary or alternate data for the banks to perform, as part of their verification or onboarding journey. So they can say, for example, ping PayNet, hey, this customer, does he have a bank account somewhere else? Then we can check yes, no, right? Or this customer, when was his or her last transaction? It could be yesterday, it could be tomorrow. And we have that transactional data that has rich, that can provide a very good insight about that customer and can be utilized as a supplementary identity verification data, right? So that's the second model. Of course, to do all this, we need to be mindful of privacy requirements and getting consent from the customer. So all of this requires customer consent, right? The other part of it is, as I mentioned earlier, the government is embarking on the National Digital Identity Initiative. We are collaborating with our central bank and the National Registration Department, including their implementing agency, to collaborate on how we can, leverage each other's expertise, knowledge, experience to work together on this. One of the things that we are pursuing is potentially assessing or verifying a customer's identity with the Central National Registration Database. But that requires a lot of, determining whether there's any legal impediment for PayNet to have access to government's identity, because in Malaysia, the only government agencies and statutory bodies are allowed to use the National Registration Database for verification. So we're looking at the legal framework, whether this is something that we can leverage or not. Otherwise, we fall back to the two method that I explained earlier.
Thank you. Thank you. Rick, on your side, what is the current status of your project?
Yeah, so we are live. We launched about a month ago, which is pretty exciting. We have launched with 2 of our major banks as our first identity providers. We've got the Australian market has 4 major banks, which take up about 80% market share collectively, and we are backed by all 4. We've got strategic buy-in from all 4. 2 of them just ran a little bit faster than the other 2, so we're live with 2. We've got the other 2 coming in the next few months. So that's really exciting. We've got a small number of sort of relatively small relying parties, which we launched with effectively just to test things out, manage risk before the volumes sort of spike up. And then we've got some major retailers coming on early in the new year. So that's going to be pretty exciting.
And do you have already feedback from users that use it?
Yeah, we do. The things that our users have already appreciated is they recognize that it's privacy preserving because it's replacing the step in the process where you would have been taking a selfie and a photo of your driver's license. And, there are so many driver's licenses from Australia that are on the black market that you can buy for $5 right now. It's ridiculous. So people recognize the value of not having to do that anymore. And then the user experience is really great. It is exactly the same as just logging in to check your bank balance. So it's a really good, clean, quick user experience. So customers like it. And because customers like it, the retailers like it as well.
And meaning, what benefit does eID bring to PNet? What is the benefit for you as a scheme?
We can look at it from 2 dimensions, right? In one dimension, PNet, our core DNA is payments, right? Retail payments, IBG, QR payments, and so on and so forth. And that's the core of our capability. That's the core of product, and that to deliver that, we have a very strong infrastructure. We have a very strong team that operates really critical, high availability system, right? But then the question for us is, how do we value add to the industry, to the financial industry, right? As the heart, as somebody that is at the center or at the heart of payment. So what kind of services or what kind of value added service we can give to the banks? And the question is, and the answer to that is really around helping the banks to better manage fraud and scams, or better manage risk, for example, and also giving them the tools that they need in order to verify the identity of a person. So it's really about providing value-added services, which, from a business point of view, strategically, it's how we evolve as a domestic switch, if I may so, in terms of business strategy and business direction, right? Then the next question is, okay, what does it mean? It means that it's also a strategy on how we can be sustainable as a domestic switch, right? So in terms of, again, as a domestic switch, if we just focus on our core competency, which is payments, which as we all know, as you mentioned or not, right, there's competition from card schemes, right? So we need to defend our position as a domestic switch. And how do we do that? We need to be able to sustain our business. Then the question is, what kind of services, value-added service that we can provide for the industry? And at least for PNet, thankfully, we are at the core of payments in Malaysia, and we are, in a way, in a natural position to provide several value-added services for the industry, including digital identity in the areas of verification and authentication.
Good. Yuka, we are running out of time now. Yuka, in terms of, let's say, a conclusion, what would be your recommendation for domestic schemes to explore the digital identity? What you would recommend?
Well, my recommendation based on my experience and also being a user of digital identity is definitely that that there is a really opportunity for the domestic scheme. We heard from Meling, we heard from Rick that there are activities. I mean, you have basically three options here. I mean, from the financial industry point of view, you can be the entity who provides the identity service provider, or you can delegate that to, for example, to the banks, like in Australia. But the most value is that when you have a wallet and you have the credentials and you issue this. The other option is that, well, you just issue, or not just, but you issue the verified credentials, and you can put them in other wallets, like Apple Pay wallet. But then, of course, it dilutes somewhat the value. And finally, of course, the third option is that you just accept, so you are relying party. But the most value, like I said, is that you are in the center. So, and looking to many of the activities, like we already discussed in the world, domestic scheme have positioned and started to position, and I believe that there is a genuine value. Also for the, by the way, not just for the scheme itself, but the banking industry, also for the consumer, and not to forget that there is a lot of business to be done in the business to business side, because also the corporates, they need identity, and a strong one.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. So we are now at the Q&A session. So you can all ask your questions, and you have the Q&A option for that. So please do not hesitate for that. Waiting to have some additional questions from the attendants. Rick, what is your view for the future eID on your market?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, look, I mean, in Australia, it's pretty new, but there are so many new use cases that are still to be explored. So the way we're positioning ourselves is we're really looking at flexibility. We know that there are going to be lots of different technology approaches that are sort of going to be running in parallel for a while. So, we've got a federated model, as Jukka said, verifiable credentials, and the wallet approach is going to be emerging, and we're looking into what's our role in a verifiable credentials and wallets world, and there's lots of opportunities for us there as a scheme operator as well. All of those have got different commercial and liability implications as well, and so there's again, it's one of these scenarios where you can probably solve for the tech, but the business side is actually really, really hard. So we're really looking at that. And also, as Jukka said, business to business is enormous. It's much more complex than individual identification, but it is a massive opportunity. So we'd love to explore things like Glyph. We'd love to explore credentials, issuing credentials to employees. So we know that if you're a major bank with a treasury platform, you know that the person logging in is the finance controller from that particular business, where that individual might not be a customer of yours, but the business is. So you need to be able to issue credentials to that person in a nice, simple, clear way, and that might be something that the business themselves can issue. So there's lots of different use cases and commercial models to be explored. What we are sort of recommending to as many people as possible is build to global standards, and then it's easier to move with those as they go. So we're built on OpenID Connect using the FAPI protocol, and that is a global standard that is it is relatively easy for businesses to adopt, and so it makes our sales conversations easier, but it also means that it's easier to move with changes over time.
So we have a question from Bikram. Is there a business case for different country domestic schemes to work together on eID network sharing for customer verification? So to have exchange between different domestic schemes. Who want to reply? Meling, Rick?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I think there's a really strong business case. There's a few models where some identity providers want to be a global network themselves or a global provider themselves. There's another model which is a sort of a network of networks called GAIN, and then there's a version where between individual domestic schemes who are sort of similarly structured and have similar rules, we can absolutely explore proofs of concept, and we've got a couple that we're talking to schemes about at the moment. Again, the tech is probably the easier half of those two things before you start getting into commercials and liability.
Okay, good. Melin, what would be your recommendation to other domestic schemes?
I think as a domestic scheme, one of the questions that we always ask ourselves is how do we accelerate payments across all channels, be it B2B, B2C, account to account, and so on and so forth, right? So when we think about that problem, the answer is, payments have to be convenient and trusted, right? So then how do you make payments very, very convenient and trusted by the customers, by merchants, by the banks, right? That's where then we formulate, right? Based on our role in Malaysia, helping the banks to solve identity verification, helping the banks to solve issues, mitigate fraud and scams, is a way to make payments secure, right? And trusted. Digital ID, for example, is a way to make payments more convenient for the customer so that they can prove their identity seamlessly and securely. Right? So my advice is, again, is asking really strategic questions around your role as a domestic switch. And it's also very, very important to collaborate with your stakeholders, the banks, the fintechs, the e-wallets, and solve common problems. Because at the end of the day, all of us have the common problem around trust, around risk, around security, user convenience, and so on and so forth. And that problem needs to be solved as an ecosystem, collectively and collaboratively.
Good. Thank you. We are at the end now. So thank you very much. Thank you, Yuka, Mei-Ling, Rick. It was very interesting. To have your feedback, your return of experience. So we can see that digital ID is really there. It's not just if, but it's just a question of when, let's say. So it's already there. Mei-Ling, you are working and relying on your data, your network, you are in the right position, in a natural position, as you said, to improve the different services for your countries using digital identity. We can see also with Rick in Australia, you are speeding up the deployment of the solution. As a scheme, you provide the different information on how to use and to rely on digital identity for the different services that others can use. Yuka, we can see with you that there is this growing aspect of digital identity over the world with a very good return of experience on how it's growing out in different countries. And we can see also with the Nordics that is growing and is already used very, very well. So, and what is interesting in terms of conclusion, I would say that digital ID on one side, it is seen as a governmental approach, but on the other side, we see that banks and domestic schemes are very well positioning to speeding up that deployment. And somehow it's more to the domestic scheme to take the hand of that subject for the benefit of customer, for benefit of payment, for accelerated new type of services. And at the end, it is to the domestic scheme to do it quicker and easier, maybe, compared to a national action, if I'm trying to summarize what has been said. So thank you. Very, very interesting at the end. We will have other type of subjects all together during the year. And in September, we will have our domestic scheme event in a physical event. But during the year, we will have other type of events on different type of subjects. So keep in touch, stay with us. And thank you to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Yuka. Thank you, Muling.
Thanks, Arnaud. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anna. For
Have a
organising.
nice day. Have a nice evening also. Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.